Today's session, minimum wage check in Sage 50 Payroll. My name is Sarah. It is just me today, but I will be keeping an eye on the Q&A panel. So if you do have any questions as we go along, feel free to pop them in there, and I have put plenty of time aside at the end just to pick up any questions that might have came through. So I'm going to begin with a brief introduction to national minimum wage and living wage legislation, which will include the current year's rates and the previous rates as well. We're then going to take a look at the national minimum wage check in Sage 50 Payroll, which you can use to check that any hourly paid employees are being paid above the relevant minimum wage for their age. And we'll show you how to set it up in terms of pay element settings and also applying that check to any relevant employees as well. We'll then move on to a demo on processing minimum wage with the minimum wage check enabled, and I'll show you how we can automatically adjust rates for employees being paid below the minimum wage as well. We'll finish off with some time for questions and some further support as well. Like I said, it is just me today, but any questions you have, get them popped in the Q&A and we can pick those up at the end. So let's get things underway with a little bit on national minimum and living wage legislation. So what is the difference between minimum and living wage? Well, it's essentially just what it's being called by the government. So the national minimum wage is the minimum pay per hour that employees are entitled to receive. Now, the national living wage is slightly higher than the national minimum wage, and that applies to employees that are aged 21 and older. And for the rest of the webinar, I will be using the term minimum wage, but of course that's just going to mean minimum or living wage. So let's take a look at these minimum hourly rates. So I've got the current rates on the slide here and also the previous rates from last tax year as well, just to compare. So for 21 and over, so that's the minimum and living wage, that is £12.21 this current tax year, so it was previously £11.44. Then you've got the 18 to 20 bracket. So that was previously £8.60, that went up to £10 this year. Then you've got the under 18 and the apprentice rate as well. So that is £7.55 this year, was previously £6.40. Now, just something to touch on with the apprentice rate. So that does apply to apprentices who are under 19 or who are in their first year of apprenticeship. So if they are over 19 and they've past that first year of their apprenticeship, it then goes up to whatever band applies for their particular age. So I have put a couple of links on this slide as well, which will take you through to more information about the legislation. So that's on both gov.uk and ACAS's website. So if you do download the handout today, you'll be able to check those out in a little bit more detail. Now, what I want to show you is where you can actually check the minimum wage rates within your programme. So I'll just bring these slides down for now and jump into payroll. So really handy, these being within the software. So if you go into company, just in the bottom left, so company tasks, on your tasks on the left hand side, you want to be in legislation. Now in legislation, you'll notice there is a tab for minimum wage. And you can see you have all of the legislation within here. So you've got the age brackets and the rates as well. You've also got an apprenticeship rate down at the bottom. So quite a handy place just for you to remind yourself what the rates are. You know, just saves you having to go onto Google or anything like that, because everything is actually contained within the program. So really handy place for you to go and check if you're not 100% sure. I'm just going to close out of that for now. So that's about it for legislation. Now, what I do want to focus on in the webinar today is the feature within Sage 50 Payroll that enables you to check that your employees are paid at least the minimum or living wage. So one thing just to clarify at this point is that this does only work for hourly paid employees. So if you do pay your employees a fixed salary you will want to do a manual calculation to check that their hourly rate is above the relevant minimum. But if they are paid hourly, then that can definitely be checked by the software, and I'll show you how that all works in these next couple of demos. So first thing we're going to take a look at is the pay element settings. So that's over on the left-hand side there. So for each payment type, you do need to define whether that payment should be included in the national minimum wage check calculation and whether that payment also represents hours worked. So there's two kind of components to that. So the calculation the system is going to do, it's going to be the total of the payments that are flagged for the minimum wage check that will be used in the calculation, divided by the payments that record hours as well. So you've got a couple of parts to this. So based on that, you would then need to enable or apply the minimum wage check within the employee record. So you can either do that on an individual basis. So it might be that you have some hourly employees and some salary employees. So you'd only be flagging it for the hourly ones. Dependent on how many people, you can either do that via the record on an individual basis, or you could use your global changes as well. But let me walk you through those steps right now. So let's get jumped back into payroll. So I have all weekly employees on my payroll. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check my pay element settings. So still do just want to be in company in the bottom left. But this time I'm going to go into pay elements. So just a couple of options above my legislation option. So you can see I have 4 pay elements set up. So the first one is basic. So I'm just going to go in and edit my basic pay element. And that's just paid for my hourly paid employees. So everyone has this pay element. Now, the bit I want to be focusing on is this option here. So this middle option for my minimum living wage calculation. So I've got both of these boxes ticked. So I want to include the value and both the hours number value in my calculation. Now, because this is an hourly rate payment, I do want to include both of these within the check. So that's all ready to go. I've got my main basic all set up to be included in that minimum living wage calculation. I'm just going to press OK on that. Now, my second pay element I want to look into is my overtime. So if I just go into edit overtime. So this overtime payment includes a premium element because it is actually being paid at time and a half compared to the usual hourly rate. Now, under minimum wage legislation, premium elements aren't actually included in earnings when checking the minimum wage. So if you do have any overtime rates that are calculated in this way, what you would want to do is you want to set them up as a factored payment. So you can see I've got this set up as a factored payment that calculates the rate at 1.5 times the base payment, and the base payment is just the basic. So for this one, you can see when it comes to the minimum living wage calculation, we are including the hours and we're including the value, but we are also indicating that this payment is a premium element as well. So that way, when it does the calculation, it's just going to disregard that extra amount. So I'm happy with that. Now, the third payment here is commission. So for this one, I'm just going to go into edit. I am still going to include the value in the national minimum wage calculation, but this payment doesn't represent hours worked. So this is just a payment that's in addition to their actual hourly pay. So although I'm including the value in the calculation, I'm not actually going to include the hours on number in the calculation. So that's why this first box is the only one ticked here. So that's looking all good for a commission payment. Now, this final payment that I have is actually set up specifically for cases where I want to top up an employee's pay so that it meets the minimum wage requirements, but without actually using an existing element like basic or overtime or commission. I actually just want to show it as a separate line on my pay slip. So for this one, again, I do want to include the value in the calculation, but it doesn't represent hours worked. So I'm leaving that second box unticked, but you will see a little bit on how this works later on within the demonstration. So that's where you can check your payment settings. I'm happy with my settings now for this one. Just a little quick tip, if you do maybe have quite a lot of pay elements in your company, if you want to just check all of the settings at the same time, there is quite a handy report you can run to do that. So what I can do is I can go into my reports just above my employee list. And I'm going to go to company. So I do have this reports favorited. It is a payment types report. But in order to find that, if you don't have that one favorited already, you can go to reports, then company. And it's within this folder here. So just the payment type reports. If I just go to preview that. Now, again, this is great if you do have a lot of pay elements in your company and you're just not too sure, if you do have your settings configured correctly. This report's going to show you all of your payment types, and it will have this minimum wage section right here. So what you'll be able to see under this minimum wage section is, are the hours included? Is the rate included? And is it also a premium element? So you can see for my overtime, for my factored payments, it has actually specified that it is the premium element. So just a really handy report to see what settings you might need to change and to make sure everything is set up correctly to perform that minimum wage check effectively. So that's just a little bit on a handy report. So the second step of the setup is just to make sure that your relevant employees are actually flagged to perform the check when you're going through your enter payments. So again, if you do have a mix of hourly and salaried employees, it might be that you just want to do your hourly and you want to do it one by one, or you can use your global changes as well. So if you do want to do it selectively for the employee, so per employee basis, so I'll just do that for employee 1. You can go into the employee and employee record. You would go along to your employment tab and then into pay elements just down at the bottom. Now what you'll see is you can see I've got my default rates in here, I've got my payment in here. What we want to select is we want to apply the minimum living wage check to this employee. So I'm going to tick that box there, and that means it's going to check for that within enter payments for this person. So I can now save that and close out of the record. Now the other way I could do it, if I don't want to go through and individually tick who I want to include, is I can use global changes as well. So I'm just going to highlight the rest of my employees. And to do that via global changes, you would go to tasks just along your top toolbar. Go down to global changes. You would then go to payments. And you can see at the bottom, you have that option to set the apply minimum living wage flag. So I'm just going to select that. See, it's picked up my 4 employees. I select yes to the message, and you can see a total of my 4 employees have now been successfully updated. So I've enabled my check for the employees. So they're now going to appear on the minimum wage employee report. So again, similar to checking that your pay elements are configured correctly, This is a good way just to figure out, especially if you've got a bit of a larger payroll, who was actually flagged for the check and whether you've got everyone on there that you need to. So I'm going to just go ahead and select everyone. And I'm going to go back into my reports. Again, I have this report in my favourites, so it's a minimum wage employees report. But if you don't have that favoured, you can find it from the employee folder just down the left-hand side here. So I'll just scroll down. This minimum wage employees report. So now that I've flagged my employees for the check within their record, if I go to preview this now, just make that a little bit bigger for the demo. What you can see is it's going to tell me exactly who is flagged for the check. It will give me their date of birth and their age, and also what band they fall into as well. So really handy if you do have a larger payroll. If you are just in the process of setting this up, it's going to show you exactly who has been flagged, their age, and what band they fall into as well. So definitely get that in your favourites if you haven't already. So that was our setup process. So just to run through a little bit of a recap there. So we've configured our pay elements and we've decided which are included in the check, and so which values are included in the check and which ones account for the hours as well. We've then also applied that check in either the record or via global changes as well. So what I can do, I'm now at the point where I can process my pay, is I can have the system actually check whether they're being paid above the relevant minimum wage for their age. I will then see a prompt if I'm not paying them the minimum wage. It will ask if I want to adjust any of the variable payments. Now, just a little bit of a note on that. If you do have your pay element set up to be fixed in the employee record, you will still see the prompt telling you that they're being paid below the national minimum wage, but you do have to go and make the adjustment manually. You can only automatically adjust for variable payments. So this is just a little look at the message that would pop up if the employees are paid below the minimum wage. Again, if you do have variable payments, you can select the payment, as you can see on the screenshot there, that you would like to adjust. Again, you might have seen earlier, that is actually why I've set up a separate payment line just for one of my examples, because I do want to show it separately on the pay slip. Now, that's just a choice I've made. You don't have to do that. So, you know, it is just down to the employer exactly what they want to do. Now, any default rates can be updated that are stored in the record. So if that's maybe like, you know, a permanent sort of change, if they've had a birthday come up, things like that. So let's jump back into payroll and look at a few different scenarios. So I've got a few scenarios here that I'm just going to take you through as we run through the minimum wage check. So I'm going to return to my payroll tasks. Just double check my next processing date, which is the 10th. I have weekly employees. And I'm just going to work with one employee at a time for this one. So my first employee is just a regular employee. Now I've called it a regular employee just because they're over 21. So they're entitled to the national living wage of £12.21. So you can see they're 44, well over 21 there. If I go into employment and pay elements, got my £12.21 within there. So they've got the right default rate for their age. So I'm going to go into enter payments now for the employee. You can see the default rate has pulled through from the employee record. And as it meets the national minimum wage requirements, if I click on Save Next, I don't get any prompt to adjust as it meets the criteria. Now, if for some reason the rate was lower, so just as a bit of an example, let's knock this down to £11. And if I go to click on Save Next, that's the point where I'm going to get my alert and it's asking me what payment I want to actually adjust. So because this person just has the variable payment basic in there, that's the one it's going to ask me if I want to adjust. Now I can just go ahead and adjust. However, that won't change it permanently for the next pay period. So I'm just going to cancel out of there for now. And I'm going to change that back to 12/21. What that means is that's actually going to be retained next time round. So pretty straightforward, this first employee. Now, my second employee for overtime, if I go and just check their employee record, they're over 21 again, but this time we're going to introduce some overtime into the situation. So I'm going to go back to my payroll tasks and just into my enter payments. So what you can see here is they're getting paid basic hours at £12 per hour, but they are also doing 10 hours of overtime, which is paid at time and a half. So that's going to be paid at £18 per hour. Now, at first glance, if we look at hours worked, so let me just get my calculator up. So at first glance, if we look at hours worked, they have worked a total of 50 hours, and the total gross pay for the week is £660. So if we do the £660 divided by the hours worked, so 50, that actually gives us £13.20, which would mean at first glance, they're being paid above the minimum wage. But if you remember earlier in the webinar, the overtime actually includes a premium element, which down to legislation isn't actually included within the calculation. So if we go to Save Next for this one, you can see this is actually going to get prompted that it is below the minimum wage. Now, the only variable pay element they have in the record is basic. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust that. And what you can see now is that's now adjusted the basic rate accordingly. So that's now meeting the national minimum wage requirements at £12.21. And in turn, that has adjusted their overtime as well. So again, because the overtime is a premium element, that isn't actually included in the calculation. So although at first glance, it might look like they're getting above the minimum wage on average, because overtime is included, we do still want to pay them the £12.21 for their basic. So the national minimum wage checker has adjusted that accordingly for me. So that's it for employee number 2. Now, employee number 3, which is a little bit more of an interesting example. Employee number 3 actually has a birthday. The birthday is actually today. So if we just look in the employee record, you can see they're turning 21 today, which might make you think that the minimum wage needs adjusted. But again, under legislation, the change actually takes effect from the first full pay reference period after their birthday. So this does mean we don't actually need to change it until the first pay reference period after their 21st birthday. Now, what does need to change is their NI category. So they're on an M at the moment. So I'm going to go and change that to A. Let's save the record. Now, if I go into enter payments for this employee, you can see they are still being paid the rate of £10 per hour. So that's the rate for 18 to 20-year-olds. But if I go to Save Next, I'm actually not getting any prompt just yet. Now, you know, as an employer, you might choose to increase it if you wanted to, but legislatively, that's not actually going to prompt me to change it until next week's payroll. So the reason behind that is that this pay reference period is split between them being under 21 and over 21. And that change doesn't come into effect until the first full pay reference period that they are 21. So that will give me a prompt next period. So I would expect that next time round. So I'm just going to leave that as is for this pay period. Now, the next employee, so employee commission. This employee is commission based. So let's go and enter payments for them. So they get their hourly pay at £10 per hour, plus a commission rate, so £100 in commission this week. Now, if I get my trusty calculator out again, just clear that. So if we look at the basis of what's in there already, so they're getting £500 gross pay. And they're working 40 hours. Now, remember, for their commission, the hours isn't included. So we just want to divide that by 40. So you can see, on average, they are actually getting £12.50, which would be above the national minimum wage. So if I go to save, I'm not getting any prompt because on average, they are earning above. So no adjustments needed in that instance. But let's say that they earn less commission this month for whatever reason. So I'm just going to knock that down to £50 commission. If I now click Save Next, you can see that is, of course, flagging up that they are getting paid below the national minimum wage. Now it's asking if I want to adjust my basic or commission, but actually I don't want to adjust either of those two. I want to add a separate payment line just so it shows separately on the payslip. So I'm just going to cancel out of that for now before I do any adjustments. And I'm going to add a payment into this employee. So I'm going to add my minimum living wage top up in here and just save that. So now when I go to save next and it asks me what payment I want to adjust, I can now select the minimum living wage top up. So that's going to just show a little bit clearer on the employee's pay slip and show on a separate line just so they know exactly what the extra amount is. So I'm going to select that to adjust. So you can see there, it's put the difference, so £38.40 on that separate line. So that would be what it needs topped up by to actually meet those national minimum wage requirements. I'm just going to save that. And we'll take a little look at the payslip for this one, just so you can see how that looks. So you can see here, rather than me putting it on the basic or on the commission, we've got an extra line now there on the payslip. Again, that is totally optional. It's just down to personal preference. So you can do either or. So the last employee I'll show you is actually an apprentice. So I'm just going to go into the employee record again for this one. So they're an apprentice, but they are 23. But if I go along to the employment tab and just check their apprenticeship, you can see they are technically still in their first year of apprenticeship. So almost coming up to a year, but not quite hit that year mark yet. So the rate does still apply. So it won't be until after that first year they would go up to the relevant one for their age. So I'm just going to close out the record for the apprentice. Go back into enter payments. So you can see as they're in the first year of apprenticeship, they are on the £7.55. Now, if I go to save next, there's no prompts because they've not hit that year mark just yet. So I'm happy with that as well. So that's how it all works. I'm now just going to go ahead and actually update my records for this pay period. So I'm going to go ahead and lock those figures in. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to change my processing date to the next pay period. Press OK. And let's just take a little look and in enter payments for this time round. So do remember we made some adjustments last pay period. So let's take a little look and see how that looks this next time round. So my first employee, they're fine. So we did play around with the figure, but we manually changed the rate back. So you can see that that has retained it this time round. So if I go to save next for this employee, they're looking all good. Now, employee number 2 with the overtime, if you remember, we did make some adjustments for this one. So we used the adjust option through the national minimum wage check and we let that adjust it for us. But just to note with that, if you do use the adjust function, it doesn't retain it next time round. So can you see how this employee, their rate has went back to £12? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now manually change that in enter payments, just so it retains this for next pay period. So you could, adjust each time. So if I change that back, you could use the adjust button every time, but if it is a permanent change, I would recommend changing it manually, and that just means you're not going to get prompted each time round. So I'm going to change that so it's a more permanent change. Now, employee number 3, remember, last pay period, they had turned 21, but it wasn't a full pay reference period. So this is the first full pay reference period after they've turned 21. So if we now go to do save next, it is actually going to prompt us to adjust the wage accordingly. So you can see if we adjust, that's going to put it up to £12.21. So again, if I do want this to be a more permanent change, they've had a birthday, we know it is going to be this going forward, I can go into my employee record, along to employment, into pay elements, and I'm going to change the default rate as well. That is handy if you use the reset payments wizard, because that will make sure if you do go ahead and reset payments, it's going to take that new rate going forward. Now, our 4th employee that had commission on there, I'm going to change these values slightly. So I'm going to take off the top up as they're getting £100 in commission again this month. And you can see if we save that, that now again meets the national minimum wage requirements. And then finally, we have our apprentice. So if we check our apprenticeship date in the employee record, they have actually now reached that first year of apprenticeship. They are 23 years old. So that now should go up to the relevant minimum wage. So we go to save next. You can see it is going to prompt me to adjust this up to the relevant age bracket. So if I adjust the basic, they've now went up to £12.21 as they're 23 years of age. So again, you could just adjust every time you see that prompt, or alternatively, you can amend manually in enter payments and within the employee record as well. So definitely a couple places, if it is a permanent change, that you want to make sure that you've entered the figures. So that's how it all works. I do just want to recap a few points. So this message is going to appear for employees when you've applied the minimum wage check and they're being paid below the minimum wage for their age. Now, remember, if they are variable payments, you are prompted if you want to adjust the payment. But if you have set up your payment to be a fixed payment, where rates are fixed within the employee record, you will see the prompt, but you will need to then go into the record and make the change yourself. Your default rates can then be adjusted accordingly, as you've seen in the demo, so via the employee record and within your enter payments as well. So just a few useful links on here as well. So I've included these in the handouts. If you download the full colour version, these will all be clickable as well. So I've got all the step-by-step guides on setting up and using the minimum wage function. So that's all just on our knowledge base there. I've also put some really useful links on the gov.uk website and also ACAS. So that gives you some more detail around the legislation and any kind of special circumstances. So some really handy links to refer to there. Now, I do want to wrap things up just by running through some further support and, as promised, some questions at the end. So we do have some more upcoming webinars in October. So if you want statutory payments, attachments and month end towards the end of the month as well. So make sure to get signed up for those if you can, and hope to see you on those. Do want to touch on the Help Centre as well. So it is a really great resource. You can access it really easily by clicking on the help icon in Sage 50 Payroll, that's just next to your reports, or you can access it directly via the web. You can get your technical support guides on there. You can get our recorded on-demand webinars and information on how to get in touch with the team if you need to. I do want to shout out Sage University as well. It is a really great resource, so you can do anything from bite-sized bits of learning to full certifications on there. So you really can do it all at your own pace. Just go to sageu.com. It is totally free to set up an account and explore. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. But thanks again for joining me today, and hopefully I will see you again very soon. But it is goodbye for now.